If you want to be turning to Luke chapter 2, we're going back there this morning, and I'm going to read just a portion of what we looked at last week. Not all of it, but it also introduces us to the next character, if you will, in what maybe we could call the Christmas story, even though a lot of times these are ones that get kind of passed over. It seems like you don't see them. Of course, you don't see them in a manger scene. And we end up putting the wise men in a manger scene when they weren't there. But I don't know why these other characters can't be placed there as well. Maybe they are. Maybe we just don't know that that's who they are standing there. But in Luke chapter 2, we have Jesus' parents taking him. And if we start, say, in verse 21 of Luke chapter 2, it says, "On the 8th day, when it was time to circumcise him, he was named Jesus, the name the angel had given him before he had been conceived. When the time of their purification, according to the law of Moses, had been completed, Joseph and Mary took him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every firstborn male is to be consecrated to the Lord, and to offer a sacrifice in keeping with what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons." The next statement we read is where we went last week. In verse 25, "Now there was a man in Jerusalem called Simeon." And then you have the description of who Simeon was and what happened. But if we took at that comma and we just skipped on over to down to verse 36, it says, "There was also a prophetess, Anna, the daughter of Penuel of the tribe of Asher. She was very old. She had lived with her husband 7 years after her marriage, and then was a widow until she was 84. She never left the temple, but worshipped night and day, fasting and praying. Coming up to them at that very moment, she gave thanks to God and spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Jerusalem." All right, so here we have this situation where Simeon comes up, and we were looking at this last week, some of the things that he said in verse 29, and then coming down even up to verse 35. The fact that Simeon is prophesying about Jesus. He's praising God for Jesus, this little baby that is in the arms of his mother, and he comes up and he holds Jesus. And it's interesting because normally you'll see the woman coming up and wanting to hold a baby, but Simeon's the one that gets to do that. Anna's in the scene, but you don't see her yet. I mean, she's there, but when Simeon is saying what he's saying, and he says, the last thing he says, "A sword will pierce your own soul too." I mean, saying this to Mary, because she's going to go through some difficult times. And so with this, right as he says that, it says there was also a prophetess, Anna, the daughter of Penuel, the tribe of Asher. She was very old. So it tells us a little bit about her, but it says coming up to them at that very moment. So it's at the same time. You get the picture that Simeon's still standing there, and he's still saying what he's saying as she approaches, and she has something to say. Now, we don't know any more than what we know right here about this lady, except for what we can kind of figure out putting this together. Don't you love how the scriptures are written, that it's not written that, once upon a time in a faraway place there was this lady named Anna? No, we don't have that. We know what her father's name was. It connects that because there would have been people, I mean, even during the day and time when this was written, probably people could have traced this back and said, "Oh yeah, Penuel of the tribe of Asher." And so you have the tribe that she was descended from. You have her father's name, and so you're connecting her. This is a real person. This isn't just part of a story that once upon a time in a faraway place. This is a story of a person. Now, the central figure of this story, of course, is Jesus. But in this, as these individuals are named, it's very specific who they are, when this is happening. It was at the time when not only then Jesus was born, but the time of his purification was done. And so they went to the temple to make sure that they were doing the things according to the law. They were following through with all this. But it says of this lady, and it's interesting because it says there was also a prophetess. You don't read of a lot of prophetess. You hear of the men who were prophets, but of those women who would prophesy, you don't read a lot. I mean, we find Paul mentioning, prophetesses, but here Anna is told to be a prophetess. Now, whether or not in the past before this, people saw her as a prophetess, it doesn't clarify. But at this point, now Luke's writing after the fact, right? After it's happened. And so they may start listening to her more after this, but we know that she was in the temple. When it starts describing her, it's interesting because it says she had lived, and it depends on your translation. I'm going to read this again, and some of you are going to say, wait a second, that's not what mine says. Well, yeah, it doesn't. They don't all say it the same way here. There's a little bit of discrepancy in the translation on what is meant by the wording that is used, but it says she had lived with her husband 7 years after her marriage, and then was a widow until she was 84. Some of your translations may say that she lived 84 years after she was a widow. And so that being the case, I mean, if she was married just as a young lady, and then she was married for 7 years to her husband, I mean, she could be over 100. That would be the correct translation here. Now, the way the NIV reads it, and many others as well, is that she was 84 years old. But it's making a point, and it's making a specific point about her, because she had lived with her husband 7 years, so she was only married for 7 years, and then she became a widow. Now, keep in mind, this would have been a young lady. She would have now been a widow. And think about, I mean, there were provisions, but not to live like she probably would have been able to live had her husband lived. But she was widowed at a young age. And so it kind of explains a little bit. It says she never left the temple but worshiped night and day, fasting, praying. And so this lady was there on a constant basis. When people would come to the temple, they would see Anna. And she was there. She was a permanent fixture in the temple. And you say, well, what was she doing all of this time? Well, we know one thing she was doing, or two things that she was doing for sure. She was fasting and praying. And a lot of times we don't think about that as serving. You know, we think, well, you know, I'm handicapped in some way, or I'm older now and I can't serve. No, what about fasting and prayer? And so sometimes we think because we are removed from a situation, maybe somebody that is even homebound, and they feel like they can't serve. She was serving night and day, fasting and praying. And so making that connection, we're going to look at some other passages on that just a little bit. But when it's giving this description of her, we see somebody that is completely dedicated their life to serving God. And if she's serving at the temple, I mean, she could have been helping she couldn't have done what the priests were doing, obviously, but she could have done things as far as cleaning. We don't know of all that she might have done with what was going on in the temple. You know, sometimes when we hear temple, we think of a church building. That wasn't the temple. There were a lot of things went on at the temple. I mean, I know this morning as I was driving down Campbell, and I know it sounds crazy, but did anybody else notice the crispness, not just cold, but to the air this morning? I mean, it was very, very early, and I had rolled my window down. I mean, I'd left the heat on coming all the way in, and I'd rolled my window down, and as I came down Campbell, all of a sudden, wood smoke, and it smelled really, really good. Did you ever think about the smell that would have been around the temple? Maybe some of the smells around the temple wouldn't have been so good. But can you, if there was meat on the altar, I mean, you think about it. You walk outside and somebody's barbecuing in the neighborhood. What do you go? Somebody's cooking. You know, you notice it right away. And some of you love to do that just to make the rest of us salivate. You know, we're wanting what you're cooking. But the smells that would have been around the temple, the things that would have been going on, and here's Anna. I mean, she's there. And you get the idea that probably other people that were coming, you know, if you had sinned and you had to go to the temple to take care of that sin, how would you feel? I mean, what would be your approach? If we have to sit down with somebody else and say, you know, I need to talk to you about something. I've done something wrong. How do you feel when you do that? I mean, the shame sometimes it's involved, the guilt that's involved, the difficulty in forgiving yourself. But here, these people were going through physical acts of things to take care of sin problems within their life. They would have to go before the priest. They would offer the animal, depending upon the sacrifice that was demanded. I mean, they had to worship sacrifices, and so people were coming. There were others that were, they were all excited. They'd taken care of the sin sacrifice. That was out of the way. Now we can worship God, and they were excited. They were coming to the temple. There was, and the hustle and bustle that would have been going on, especially during this day and time, of the things that were happening in the temple. We know that Jesus overturned the tables of the money changers twice. I mean, so there were, and they were there to sell people or to change the money, but also to into the temple currency that was being used, but also with the doves and all of that being sold because people were having to make sacrifices, and there was all kinds of things going on. But here was Anna. And what was she known for? She was known for being there, for serving night and day. A dedication. Fasting and praying. Think about the people that she might have been fasting and praying for that were coming to the temple. The people that might have been hurting, the people that might have been suffering, the people that might have been seeking God, His forgiveness, His fellowship, maybe feeling rejection from other people. She was fasting and praying. If you look at Psalm 1, in the psalm, it mentions something, and when we think of night and day, I mean, this always comes to my mind. When it starts out in Psalm 1, it's just a short psalm, so I'm going to read it. It says, "Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of mockers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by the streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever he does prospers. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff that the wind blows away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish." You notice the one who's not standing in the way, and that's not talking about standing in the way of somebody going somewhere, is the way as we would have a road, or in the path of sinners or mockers, and doesn't follow the counsel of those who are wicked. Man, we could go all over the place with that one, couldn't we? I mean, who are we listening to for advice? But his delight, he says, is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. That idea of day and night, what do you get from that? Dedicated to it. You're thinking about it on a constant basis. It doesn't go away from you where you're not thinking about God's law. And of course, for us, I mean, looking at Old Testament here, when we're looking at the Psalms, and think about what we have that is so much better than the law. I mean, what we have in Jesus Christ. How much is He on our minds? Hopefully, day and night, that we meditate on Him. You know, this idea of meditation. When we read it in Scriptures now, and even our minds are tainted somewhat to more of the Eastern religion, view of meditation, and that's not what this is talking about. But that it is on our mind, and we have the opportunity. I mean, I used to say, we have the opportunity. We can reach beside our chair at home, pick up the Bible, turn and read it. I mean, if you already got your phone in your hand, I mean, just punch it up and use that Bible that's on there, or whatever it is that you think. How we have the access. These people wouldn't have had that access. I mean, they didn't even have it in their home. They had to listen to it being read. It wasn't like they all had a copy of the law or what the prophets were saying or any of those things. They could listen to it being read, but here they were meditating on it day and night, so they were memorizing it. I mean, yeah, they had portions of it written on their doorposts. They had on their foreheads and that type of thing, on the backs of their hands. I mean, they would do that kind of thing, even to honor the Word of God. But here is Anna She's in the temple day and night. It's a devotion. She's going to be there for whoever needs her, whenever they need her, at the temple. And so she is serving God. In Hebrews chapter 13, as the Hebrew letter, if you will, is really about this comparison that's going on between the Old Covenant and the New. And this comparison is brought out of Jesus and of the priesthood, of the temple or the tabernacle, and of what we have now in Christ, of the promises. I mean, of all of these things, the comparisons are made of how much better we have it than those who were having to live under the old law. And in all of this comparison, as he comes over here, and we're going to read the context, it says in verse 11, chapter 13 of Hebrews, the high priest carries the blood of animals into the most holy place as a sin offering, but these are burned outside the camp. And so Jesus also suffered outside the city gate to make the people holy through his own blood. Let us then go to him outside the camp, bearing the disgrace he bore. For here we do not have an enduring city, but we are looking for the city that is to come. And then it says, through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of lips that confess his name. And do not forget to do good and to share with others, for with such sacrifices, God is pleased. I mean, you get the idea that if Anna would have heard this read, this would have been exactly what she was doing, because it really was anyway. I mean, the praise of her lips. Did you notice over here in Luke what it says about her and what she was saying? It says, coming up to them in verse 38, at that very moment, she gave thanks to God and spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Jerusalem. Some translation says continued telling people. So she was telling others. I mean, she came up and she came up to Jesus right then. It seems like right when Simeon was saying what she was saying, and she gave thanks to God, but she started telling other people about Jesus. How much did she know? How much did she say? It says she was a prophetess. I don't know what all she told them, but she was telling people, all the people that were looking for the redemption of Israel, and so many of them, I mean, most, as it seemed, as Jesus later on, years to come, started his ministry, didn't understand what the redemption for Israel was really going to be. But she was talking about it, and she was telling other people. And so, what example for us? I mean, what do we know about Jesus? Think about the details that we know. Think about the details that we can look back into Scripture and see that they couldn't have known. I mean, we don't know how much Anna knew. She was a prophetess, so she was telling people about the redemption and what that it was this baby. This was the one. She was testifying with Simeon. This is him. And so she was telling people about this baby. But she was telling people about God redeeming, buying back his people. But think about what we know, how much more that we know than she could have known, how much more that we now understand, because we know that he went to a cross. We know why he went to a cross. We know the fact that it took the death of him in order to forgive us. We know the gospel message. And are we continually going about telling other people about it? With as small amount as probably she could have known, she was telling people. What an opportunity we have. Are we continually devoting ourselves to service? And if that, what is that service? Well, in some cases, it may just be fasting and prayer. In other cases, it may be what we can do hands-on that assuredly she must have been doing. There's a description that we have in 1 Timothy chapter 5, and you don't have to turn over there, and I probably won't either, but there's just a description, and it's an interesting passage because Paul is telling this young evangelist, Timothy, of various things that he needs to make sure are done and that are done right. And of course, we have instructions for elders and deacons. We have instruction about those who are teaching things false and what to do when that happens, and about remaining faithful to the Word, and about teaching other men who will teach other men who will teach other men, and that kind of thing that Paul is giving instruction to Timothy about. In chapter 5, he talks to him about widows, and he describes those who are widows indeed. And basically, and when you get some time, look at that and read it, and the description Anna would have fit right in. Those who are serving, because and seemingly she was taken care of by God for doing that. If you want to go ahead and come up, you can. So I guess for application for us, as we look back at the time that Jesus was born, there were a lot of characters in and out of that scene. From the time that he was announced and the interaction that happened even between Mary and Elizabeth, because John the Baptist was coming too, even to the point that we have, some possibly 2 years, up to 2 years later, the wise men coming and seeing him as well, bringing gifts to him. But of all these characters that kind of come in and out, we see two that we know very little about, Simeon and Anna. But the example that these two were and how God was utilizing them was important enough for us to know that Jesus was being witnessed about even when he was a baby. So is there an importance to us remembering Jesus as a baby? Sure there is. Otherwise we would not have been told about it. But we're told details about it, even this moment in the temple. So for us, what do? We can reflect on what were these people like? Why were they there? And if not for any other moment in their life, but probably if you talk to all the people that Anna would have served, she was 84 years old or older, depending on the translation there. All the people that she served all of her life after the death of her husband that she'd been married to for 7 years. Maybe this isn't the one that stood out for them. Maybe it was the time that they cried on her shoulder because they really wanted to do better. They were tired of coming and having to kill doves. What is your moment? Sometimes maybe we think, well, we've already had it. Do you suppose Anna stopped at that point? No, Simeon, he was ready to die. It was like, okay, I've seen Jesus. I've seen the baby. Now you can take me. I almost get the impression Anna just probably figured she was going to keep going and doing what she was doing. So you may think you've had your moment, but God's going to use all the moments. That's the thing with Anna. She was continually devoting herself, and she kept telling people. So he'll use all your moments. It doesn't have to be one. If you're here and you need to respond to this, make the application. Are you using your moments for him? Whatever that application needs to be. If you need to come as we stand and sing, come forward.